Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm sitting here with one of our Spanish healthcare interpreters, Ryan Popma, and we're doing this conversation just to be able to learn a little bit more about the day in the life of a healthcare interpreter, the value of language access, how to work better with interpreters, and ultimately how having that understanding will create better opportunities in meaningful language access to patients and really giving them a seat at the table, which is our vision here at Linguava. So Ryan, thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me today.
Of course, David. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Excellent. Well, to kick us off here, we want the audience just to get to know you a little bit, Ryan. So a few questions just to get to know you, and then we'll dive into a couple professional questions as well. Sound good?
Sounds good to me. Right. By the way,
when you're not working as a healthcare interpreter, what is a hobby that you typically find yourself doing?
Yeah, so I'm going to go typical Northwest hobby. Born and raised in Portland, Oregon. So I love to get outside. I love to hike. Specifically, I love to backpack, doing 1 to 3 nights out in the backcountry with friends. It's one of my personal goals to one day be brave enough to do a solo backpack trip on my own. I haven't done that yet, but I got a couple planned for the summer, and I started to dabble a little bit in mountaineering. I took a course with a local nonprofit this winter, and I have not climbed a mountain yet, but that is also one of my goals over summer. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. And where would you go mountaineering?
I would go mountaineering. So the one I'm currently signed up for is called Mount Pew, which is one of the smaller mountains. I think it's kind of near Mount Rainier.
Okay.
So it's gonna be like a couple thousand feet of elevation gain. I do believe crampons would be used, but don't think super aggressive, like, whatever one of those kind of Hollywood movies are where there's just like massive production and people dying left and right. It's a little bit more calm. But yeah, I took a class and I'm interested to get out and try it and then see if it's something I want to continue doing.
I like the sound of that. Well, you'll have to keep us posted. And,
yeah, we'll do.
Make sure and share photos when you're on the mountain.
Yeah, exactly. If I go away one weekend and don't come back, I'll know why.
Yeah, we need to know ahead of time. Awesome. And what would you say your favorite food is?
Oh boy, what's my favorite food? I've been eating recently more Hawaiian food. I have this local spot. I live in John's Landing, so just on the other side of the river from Sellwood in Portland. And there's this Hawaiian place. The name escapes me, but that's been something I've eaten a lot of recently. It's been super, super tasty, like the macaroni salad, the rice, and then different kinds of meat. Yeah,
good Hawaiian food is just always a good idea.
Yeah.
I love it. And if you could learn, I know obviously you speak Spanish. I don't know if you speak other languages, but what other language would you learn if you could learn another language today?
Yeah, so I am only bilingual. I do not know any other languages. If I could learn another language, snap my fingers, it would definitely be Portuguese. I've always been attracted to Brazil, and I've really wanted to visit. I've not visited it yet. I've gotten really close, but wasn't able to swing it when I was in Latin America. And I would love to go there and to be able to speak the language and communicate with the locals in their native tongue would be wonderful.
Awesome. Yeah, it's similar to Spanish, so it'd be easier than some languages for sure. And if you could snap your fingers and go anywhere in the world right now today, where would you find yourself?
I would have to say again, Brazil, probably Florianopolis, somewhere on the coast, maybe Sao Paulo, and what's that other one? Sao Paulo. Rio de Janeiro is the other one. So probably one of those 3 places in Brazil. Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Well, take me with you. I'll be happy to join. I've also never been, so it'd be
really
on my list to go as well.
Mm-hmm.
And learning Portuguese is also on my list too. So we're similar in that regard.
Yeah.
All right. So for a few more questions on the more professional side, when you're getting ready to take an assignment, let's say with a topic that might be relatively new for you, how is it that you prepare for an assignment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate it because I think this is something that doesn't get enough attention or shine put on it. Oftentimes because unfortunately we as interpreters don't get enough advance notice of what the topic will be, but sometimes we do. Linguava's been doing a lot better job of that, of including a little blurb in the, I guess, like portal representation of the appointment that you're going to, which is helpful. What I use is a website called Medline Plus, and it essentially is it's kind of similar to WebMD almost, where it has a little search bar and you can search by keyword or disease is most common what I do. And the really handy thing is that it essentially has ready-made parallel documents. So you can search in English or Spanish and probably other languages too. I haven't checked, but since that's my language pairing, that's what I do. And I'll usually search in English, like maybe diabetes or some super rare condition that I know I'm going to be interpreting for in the search bar. And then it populates with a handful of options. And then probably 95% of the time, whatever option you click on, then in the top right-hand corner, you can click Spanish, and then it just takes that same document that it has like a super detailed description of whatever you're looking for, and it immediately translates it into Spanish, or vice versa if you're looking in Spanish and goes to English. And so it's a super handy way to get like immediate access to vocabulary terms as well.
Okay, super helpful. We'll have to provide that link as well. It's a great tip and resource, sounds like. So, and when you're interpreting, obviously so many different scenarios, like you said, many times you walk in, you don't always know ahead of time even what the assignment is going to be, or who's going to be in the room. Is the patient going to have a family member, or sometimes multiple family members, maybe the whole family,
exactly,
and cousins and maybe neighbors there, and sometimes when we're dealing with health concerns, emotions can run high for reasons. How do you, as an interpreter, be able to stay neutral and focused, even in a more of a high stakes, high emotions situation?
Yes. So there's a lot of ways that an appointment can start to escalate in terms of emotions. The one that I see most often and have most experience with is when you have the provider, whether it's a doctor, nurse practitioner, whoever may be, a surgeon, and then the patient coming in with a perception or expectation and different goals of what they're going to accomplish. More often than not, it's a patient coming in thinking they're going to get treated for something, or they have a question about a specific health issue and they think that this doctor can deal with it. And then, because I'm mostly up at OHSU, you have a lot of different subspecialties that we're dealing with. So you have a specialist come in, and since healthcare is so compartmentalized, a lot of specialists won't feel, either comfortable, or for liability reasons, they won't want to try and give detailed answers to treat something that falls outside of their purview. And so you then have the provider kind of trying to avoid or just like flat out not able to address the patient's question. And then the patient doesn't understand because they just kind of see a doctor, they assume they're just a general doctor, and then it can kind of escalate where they're just on different pages, and then the frustration kind of climbs and climbs. And what I typically do anyways when I'm interpreting, just to concentrate and focus, is I avert my gaze. I try not to look at anybody in the eyes because it'll make my mind go blank. So to kind of help my short-term memory, I'll either look down or oftentimes I'll close my eyes. And I've found that really helps in these situations where things start to escalate, because I continue to try to not be a presence in there to the extent possible. And then also knowing that we do have tools as interpreters to intervene, right? We ideally want to stay in the neutral conduit mode, but you can kind of take that next step and go manage the encounter. And then the next step is to clarify, right? And so knowing that we have those tools as well is super helpful. And sometimes that can be needed, where the interpreter can step in, refer to themselves as the third person, and sort of clarify with the patient or with the provider to kind of, uncover what the misunderstanding is, and maybe it'll help. But oftentimes I just kind of avert my gaze and try not to look at them in the eyes and try to breathe, try to bring it back to breathing tips as well has been super helpful. I've gone to some conferences and they've pointed that out as a good way to kind of mitigate some of the nerves and maintain your composure.
Yeah, I like what you said about the where you're putting your focus with your eyes as well, because if you're looking in someone's eyes, which obviously to someone maybe outside of the profession might go, well, shouldn't you do that? And it's like, well, the relationship should be between the patient and the providers.
Yeah.
And so it's not needed there. And as the real role of the interpreter is there just to be able to provide that information as a conduit.
Yeah, exactly. It helps. It not only helps facilitate the communication between the patient and the provider, because if you're not looking at them, if you're looking down or closing your eyes, they're more inclined to look at whoever's eyes are open.
Right.
But I'll say I've had moments where I will look up occasionally and unintentionally I'll lock eyes with one of the providers or one of the patients, and boom, my mind goes blank, and I'll have completely forgotten whatever the utterance is, and then I'll have to clarify.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it is, and I'd be curious to know actually from other interpreters if they have a similar issue. I think it might be somewhat personal, but yeah, that's nothing makes my mind go blank than kind of locking eyes with someone and it just disappears. Yeah.
And as an interpreter, when you're obviously as part of the code of ethics, one of the code of ethics is advocacy and stepping out of our role and on occasion being an advocate. And this topic obviously can be very controversial. There's lots of different opinions as to when should you do that, how should you do that, is that something that the interpreter should even be doing at all? What does that look like? What does advocacy look like for you? And when if you have an example or something like that where you feel like this is a time when you need to advocate for the patient as opposed to the doctor or the provider doing that?
Yeah, this is also a really good question. I think it's great that you'll be speaking with other interpreters too during this series to get their opinions as well. As you said, it is mentioned in the code of ethics. It's specifically a code of ethics. It's one of the ethical codes. It's advocacy, right? So it's built in there. So we do have the right to do it, but even still, it is super controversial. Depending on the interpreter you speak with, they could have 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years of experience. You're going to get like a wildly different opinion, right? You could have someone who's just very passionately for it, and then others who say it has no place, and a lot of people who are in the middle. And I think the most important thing to clarify is, in my opinion, and based on what I've read from the NCIHC Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, a lot of people think that any sort of intervention in the encounter is considered advocacy. So if you step in to clarify, or if you step in to do any sort of intervention, that's considered advocacy, but that is not actually advocacy based on the way that I've read it, right? Advocacy is when you are essentially intervening on behalf of a patient to try to argue for or fight for like a specific health outcome. And so I have a lot of experience intervening, right? I intervene very frequently to maybe try to clarify misunderstandings like we were just talking about. Oftentimes, if I didn't hear something, if I forgot something, if I don't know what something means, I can't think of the word, I'll intervene. So I have a lot of experience with interventions in the healthcare encounter. As far as advocacy, the most immediate example that I have is more often than not when I'm trying to help a patient navigate the healthcare system in general. And that could be physical, like logistical, getting from A to B. Just this morning, I was at OHSU and I was trying to help a family who had an eye appointment in the morning with their son, and then it had a surgical appointment later on in the afternoon, and they did not know how to get from KCI to Dornbecker. And anyone who knows anything about the OHSU campus, that is like the most complicated path to try to explain to somebody, even if it's in the same language. So things like that, things like helping them set up their MyChart after the appointment. Maybe they're talking about MyChart in the appointment. The patient's probably like says something to the effect of, I haven't had any success. And then the doctor says, oh, well, you'll get help, but it's general. They don't really help them out. And then after the appointment, I will offer to help them with setting up for MyChart, registering, or speaking to a receptionist and kind of advocating for them in that way. But I really try to err on, as much as possible, getting the patient to do it themselves and then interpreting for them.
Right.
But any sort of brave, take a stance, like stand up, proud, puffing my chest out in the encounter, I don't have any experience with that. And I think it's a combination of my tendencies to be less inclined to advocate. I think that's just based on kind of what I learned, the program that I initially took to get into the field taught. And then there's, at least in my personal experience, there hasn't been a ton of opportunities where the patients are treated in such a way where it's common for me to feel like I got to, step in and argue or fight for them. I think OHSU does a really good job with their providers of generally treating the patients really well, kind of across the board, which is really nice. Yeah, so that's my experience with advocacy for the most part.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, I remember as an interpreter needing to advocate one time for a patient who was being being really mistreated by the provider,
Yeah.
just saying some real unnecessary derogatory statements, and I just reported that to the actual leadership of that organization, and that was shared there. So I think the other take with advocacy is when there is a real safety or harm
Yes.
at play, right? And that could be something that's going on maybe in the home, that's where the patient isn't safe,
Yeah.
or there's a situation where there's a clear misunderstanding that could lead to a real malpractice situation, or someone taking the wrong medication or the wrong dosage, which could have a real negative impact. And you have that knowledge. You're the only one that has that knowledge, because understanding both languages. So I think those, in my experience, have been also some good examples, right, where there's a real safety issue, as opposed to just someone wanting to go a particular direction and it's not necessarily going to impact their.
Yeah, there's so many different examples of what could eventually lead to advocacy, and it's a fascinating topic, really. I think it's one that when you're initially stepping into the field, it's not talked a lot about. I think rightfully so, because you don't want to overwhelm a new interpreter with the whole idea, because it's such a gray area, because it's really unique to community interpreting and healthcare interpreting in general. You're not advocating in the courts, really. You're not doing it in simultaneous either. But yeah, you could have an entire 8-hour continuing education course on it. And NCIC actually wrote an entirely different article to complement their code of ethics and standards of practice that I'm like halfway through. It's like 40 pages. And they only dive into advocacy. It's all about advocacy. So for anyone watching this, if you are an interpreter, I would encourage reading it, because I've been interpreting since 2016. And after reading only half of it, there's been a lot of insights where it's helped me understand better that I would be within my right as an interpreter to be able to maybe be more involved in some instances where I otherwise wouldn't have done so. So super useful document.
Yeah, no, also I'd love to be able to share that out with the community as well. It sounds like that'd be really beneficial for everyone to take a read. Last question here for you, Ryan.
Okay.
What would be something that you would recommend that healthcare providers knew about? Let's say maybe they're getting started working with interpreters, providing language access. What's something that you feel that would benefit them to make that interaction and encounter as successful as possible?
Another fantastic question, and I've got two things to say on this one. So the first one is pretty general and somewhat simple, but I would love for them to really, really understand how difficult interpreting actually is. It's a common misperception, not just with providers, but among the community and probably civilization as a whole, that if you are bilingual, you can then interpret really well. But that is not the case. And anyone who is bilingual, who has tried to interpret, could testify to that fact, right? I mean, there's a whole set of skills that are required to be a really good, high-level quality interpreter besides being bilingual. Being bilingual is just what gets you in the door. And oftentimes, I don't think individuals, but especially providers, understand the degree of difficulty that interpreting takes sometimes. So that's number one. And then the second thing is having more time, having it be a standard thing to save maybe a minute, maybe 30 seconds to speak with the interpreter before you're going into the room, to do just a small little briefing to help orient the interpreter so they know what they're getting into. And that would help. That would help greatly, right? I mean, because sometimes you have no idea what it's going to be. It could be end of life, and you're not, a conversation about end of life. It could be some sort of diagnosis. It could be good news. It could be bad news. And having any sort of information to help orient yourself as an interpreter going in would be super helpful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. Having, even if it's just 30 seconds, right? Being able to have that initial setting the stage, quick conversation is super beneficial when possible. I know sometimes there's just not enough time, but I think the more that we can do that, taking those 30 seconds really helps the overall encounter, and makes it go better, probably expedites it a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So I
agreed.
Agree with you there. Well, Ryan, again, thank you so much for joining me here on the mini series. It's great having you here and learning from you. And thanks for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Of course, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for doing this series. I think it'll be really helpful to get more information out about interpreters day to day and kind of stimulate some talking points among interpreters in the greater community.
Yep, that's the goal. Thanks, Ryan.